Nintendo have announced downloadable content for Pokémon Legends Z-A a month prior to release, and some fans are furious. I've been all over the internet the last few days seeing people's reactions ranging from horror to, well, more horror. And I'm sorry to tell you, this is not a rage bait video aiming to get hate clicks and Game Freak greedy reactions. I've got some issues with the way Game Freak run their business, but this isn't some isolated case or a way in which Nintendo is uniquely screwing their customers over. I'd like to provide a nuanced take, the good and bad of this strategy, why I quite like it, and why I feel it could backfire. DLC is simply content added to a game after its release. It's been a mainstay of gaming since the days of the Xbox 360 and PS3, though Nintendo took a long time to catch up. Is it predatory? Sometimes. I personally hate it when games launch with multiple editions just designed to scrape as much cash from you as possible. Sega's been particularly guilty of this in recent years, with some Sonic games launching with as many as 4 tiers of content depending on what you pay. But we have to put Pokémon into context. Some might say that Game Freak have been doing DLC since before DLC was cool. Red and Green, then Red and Blue, had exclusive Pokémon that you either had to trade with your friends or make sure you owned another copy of the game and another console. Later, Pokémon Yellow released with the addition of a persistent Pikachu, and the concept of the third version was born. For years, Pokémon fans lined up on launch day to buy the newest games: Gold and Silver, Ruby and Sapphire, Diamond and Pearl, Black and White, Sun and Moon. Every single one of these games was followed up by an updated deluxe version. Crystal, Emerald, Platinum, Black and White 2, and the Ultra games for Sun and Moon. Some of these games, like Black and White 2, added massive amounts of content to the game and released years later. Some, like Crystal, added a small extra storyline and a couple of frames of animation to the sprites. Crystal released only 9 months after Gold and Silver, and personally I think that's one of the more egregious examples, though Platinum and Emerald followed a similar trend. The irony of this whole thing is that players have for years been asking for the mythical third version of Pokémon X and Y to be released, feeling like the two are unfinished and cut back due to time constraints. Wouldn't it be better to pay for a DLC pack, something the 3DS was perfectly able to do, rather than buy a whole third version? Which brings me to DLC. The last 2 generations of Pokémon have had paid DLC for better or for worse, rather than a third version. The DLC has cost around £25 or $30, around half the price of a new game, and in each case has added a lot of story and reintroduced Pokémon to each game's decks. Sword and Shield had one of the weakest stories in the series and almost no post-game, but the DLC fixed a lot of that. Isle of Armor added new areas, Urshifu and a few regional forms, while the Crown Tundra went even further with a big new map, returning in new legendaries and tons of extra content. For many players, it completely redeemed the base games. I can understand why people were annoyed though. The games had less of a post-game than any Pokémon game in years, and it felt like the DLC was the reason that they'd been held back. Pokémon Scarlet and Violet looked and ran awfully, but had the best story of any Pokémon game in years. Their DLC didn't absolve them of their sins. It would take the Switch 2 to start to repair the performance issues, but it did give us even more of what Scarlet and Violet were good at: the storytelling and sense of adventure. The Kitakami region and the Blueberry Academy tell one brilliant overarching story, with brand new legendaries and a great dose of nostalgia too. So why are people so bothered about Pokémon Legends Z-A? The first Pokémon game to launch day and date on the Switch 2, all set within the confines of Lumio's City with a whole new battle system. At the Nintendo Direct in September 2025, Nintendo announced that Legends Z-A would be getting brand new DLC titled Mega Dimension, featuring new Mega Evolutions in addition to the story, but some fans were actually outraged. Why? Because DLC is traditionally added to content after launch, not a month before the game is even in players' hands. To announce DLC so early feels like a slap in the face to consumers, especially with the first cosmetic parts of the DLC coming the same date as the main game launches. And here's why I really don't mind. Maybe once upon a time, back when the Xbox 360 and PS3 were new, DLC genuinely was stuff that developers hadn't conceived of during development. Stuff that was added in post-production that justified a little extra money. But for years now, developers have planned DLC in advance of release, only announcing it months later to continue the game's life cycle and increase precious revenues. We pay for the meat of the story, knowing that the game may get future expansions. And if I'm speaking frankly, this new approach feels more honest. Game Freak is telling us in advance that the game will have DLC, and that we're going to have to pay for it if we want it. I'm more disappointed with Donkey Kong Bonanza's paid DLC. Less than 2 months after release, Nintendo announced paid DLC of DK Island, a nostalgia-pandering small area with some additional game modes. That felt like a company holding back on one nostalgic feature to make a quick buck as momentum slowed for the game's sales. I would personally rather Game Freak charge $30 for an expansion pack to a good game than make me choose whether to wait a year for a better, fuller game to come along. But that's conditional on the base game being value for money. I won't be pre-ordering this DLC, and I'll be waiting until I've played through Legends Z-A to decide whether it's worth the price. Nothing would disappoint me more than something like Sword and Shield where a half-baked game makes the DLC seem more attractive. So what are your thoughts on this latest Pokémon saga? Will you be pre-ordering the game and its DLC, or will you wait for the reviews to drop? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more Pokemon news and opinions. Thanks for watching, I'm Connor, and this is New Super Pocket Talk.